Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Dauphin County Democratic Committee's first candidate town hall. This is a series of town halls we are doing with our Democratic candidates as a chance for all of you to ask your questions for them before the November 3rd election. As you know, we are unable to meet in person, unfortunately, due to the coronavirus. So please join the discussion. You can ask your questions in the comment section, and we will respond to them. Our first candidate tonight is George Scott. He is running for Pennsylvania State Senate in the 15th Senatorial District. How are you doing tonight, George?
Wonderful, Chairwoman. Thank you for asking, and thanks for inviting me to be here tonight.
Can you explain to everyone what the 15th District is made up of?
Sure. The 15th District of Pennsylvania State Senate is composed of most of Dauphin County, to include all of Harrisburg and of Hershey. It has a few townships towards the southern end of Dauphin County that are in a different district. And then we also have all of Perry County across the river. And the majority of the voters, over 80%, lie in Dauphin County, but it's a very diverse district with urban areas, suburban areas, and of course, small towns and rural areas.
So why are you running for state senate? As we all know, you ran for Congress 2 years ago, did very, very well, came close. So why state senate this year?
Yeah, it's a great question. The process for me was a couple of different things. First was as I went through the congressional race last time, and in the time since then, watching our Congress operate, I've come increasingly to realize how deadlocked that institution is and how difficult it is to get things done there. Additionally, my family and I went through a bit of a transition. Our youngest graduated high school, headed off to college last summer of 2019. We became empty nesters and decided to find someplace a bit different, a little bit different lifestyle. I had spent a huge amount of time in Dauphin County during 2018, and so we moved into Harrisburg, became residents of Harrisburg, and after I moved, a number of people approached me about running for state senate, and particularly after some discussions with folks who really had a lot of knowledge. They said, "Look, if you really want to make a difference in people's lives, the place to do it is in state government or local government. That Congress is unfortunately deadlocked, but here you can really have an impact on people's lives, help them with the things that they're struggling with each and every day." So that's a big part of the motivation. And then just more broadly, I want to restore integrity for our political process. Folks have lost a lot of faith in our elected leaders. I want to bring people together and try to reduce some of the extreme divisiveness that we've got. And finally, I just want to pass laws that will actually help people in their day-to-day lives, whether that's with healthcare or education or any other area.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how it will aid you if elected to the state senate.
Sure. Well, I have really deep roots here in South Central Pennsylvania. My parents moved here when I was 4 years old. My father was a career Army officer. He served 31 years on active duty. And we moved into South Central PA at a very young age for me. We grew up on a family farm and learned a lot about the values that are so prevalent in this area, particularly the importance of hard work and the importance of integrity. And and then beyond that, we went to my entire family and I, including all of our kids, went through public schools and learned the importance of a quality public education. Um, and then I was fortunate enough to be able to go off to college and learn not only the value but also the cost of higher education. In my own case, I was fortunate. I had an ROTC scholarship that helped to cover the vast majority of the costs for college. But after that, I began a life of service and served in the United States Army for 20 years as an Army officer. And that was service that took me here in the US as well as overseas in both peacetime and wartime, and really gave me a deep appreciation for what a unique place our nation is and what a unique form of government we have where the people get to elect their leaders. And I think that's something that people want. They want that sense of people that are looking to serve a bigger cause than just themselves. But my story didn't end with my military service. I returned home to Pennsylvania in 2009 and have spent the past 10 years in ministry. And in that process, I've become an ordained Lutheran pastor and have served the local community, first in a congregation in East Berlin, and more recently, a congregation in Liverpool over in Perry County. And what I've seen in both those locations are people who are really struggling to get by. Good people who don't expect a lot out of their government, and who try to be very self-reliant, but who increasingly are struggling to make ends meet. And the issues that they're dealing with are ones that they can't fix on their own. And so that really motivated me to try and get involved politically and to make a difference in their lives. So I think that background, that combination of service to our nation and service to the community, helps people understand that my intent is running now for state senate to serve the district, to serve the 15th, and then to serve the Commonwealth. And that really is what this is about: is looking at what's best, not just for a particular party, but for the people of the district and for the people of Pennsylvania, and of course for our nation.
Well, that kind of segues into our first question. I have a question here from Jeff, and he would like to know what your outlook is on public service versus special interests, and how we as Democrats can clarify what is seen as an obvious difference for voters in the 15th district. He wants to know your outlook on the difference between public service and special interests, because, as you know, your opponent is heavily into real estate.
Right.
So he would like to know what you see that difference is, and how we convince voters that Democrats are more for public service.
Well, I think it's a great question, and it is at the very core of not just my race, but so many other races for this year's election. We've got a very stark choice. Pennsylvania unfortunately has an unenviable record when it comes to corruption in our state government. We're blessed that we don't have that problem with the Wolf administration, but we still have a system that's a bit of a wild, wild west when it comes, for example, to campaign finance reform. And so what we have is unlimited contributions from individuals and from organizations that create an undue influence for those individuals and organizations on candidates. And I think we need to reform that system. We need to put limits on the amount of money that people and organizations can give to candidates. And we need to have a system that more closely tracks how that money is spent, not just on campaigns, but then also once individuals are elected. We need to have a gift ban beyond what we have now, to make sure, again, that once people are in office, that special interests aren't whining and dining legislators to get what they want. But what Pennsylvania's got is, for example, you take the fossil fuel industry. There are more lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry than there are legislators in our General Assembly. There's more than one per legislator. And so what that means is that they have an undue amount of influence on legislation. And the legislation that gets passed, I'm not trying to say that we should completely, for example, shut down the natural gas industry, but the legislation that gets passed at times doesn't put the interests of the people first. We need to make sure the interests of the people are put first. And so I think that's what so many of us are trying to do in our campaigns. And I think that's a big part of why we as Democrats are the ones that should be able to make the case to voters that, look, we're looking at serving the people other than the people who are trying to put money into pockets.
Before we move on, I just want to encourage our watchers and listeners to please submit your questions in the comment section. This is your time to ask George your questions and to find out why you should vote for him on November 3rd. The next question, you brought up legislation in the very beginning. What's the first piece of legislation you would like to introduce if elected?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will tell you that my mind has changed a bit over the past 8+ months as we've been campaigning. I think now with the pandemic, I would like to get on board quickly with sponsoring paid sick leave. Um, it is something that we needed beforehand, but with this pandemic, we need it more than ever, because we have people who literally are going to work sick and putting others at risk, and they're doing that because they can't afford to not go to work. And so paid sick leave, I think, is at the forefront of some of the fixes that we need to do And I would be very happy if that was one of the first pieces of legislation, if not the first piece of legislation.
Great. You brought up COVID-19. As you know, the governor is pushing the legislature to expand his disaster relief for Pennsylvanians. And you know, this virus has affected everyone, whether health wise, whether financial. In some cases, both. Now we have the situation with the schools. As a state senator, what do you think is that balance to keep people healthy, but also make sure that people have the funds needed to continue to live?
Yeah, it is the number one dilemma that we're in right now. It's the effort to balance preserving lives and preserving livelihoods.
Right.
And I think what we've got is we've got certain people that are trying to make it an either or solution. And I don't think that's the right way to approach this. I think there's a way that we can do both. And I think that's what Governor Wolf has tried to do. He's
Yes.
tried to allow his decisions to have been driven so far, and I'm sure he'll continue to do so, to be driven by the evidence, by the data. And so, for example, I know it's been very unpopular, but when we saw the recent increase in infections, COVID-19 infections, and some of that was traced back to increased social contact, um, he reduced temporarily the occupational rate for some restaurants. Very unpopular, and I understand that. But the data that he had indicated that was one of the causal factors. And now he's just announced, I believe today or yesterday, the intent to ease those restrictions for restaurants that will self-certify that they are meeting certain standards. And so I think what we have to do is follow that approach in general throughout the state. And I know there's people that are in a rush to reopen, and I understand that urge. My wife's a small business owner of a non-essential business. And so when the closure went into effect, she shut down for 3 full months, lost all the income that would have come in before that. Now, she was fortunate to get a very small PPP loan after multiple tries to help defray some of those costs. But it's tough. It's tough for small businesses in particular, but it's tough for people everywhere. And so what we have to recognize is that the rush to reopen may help things in the short term, but in the long term, if it increases the rate of infections, then we're going to have to shut the whole economy down again, and we can't afford to go through that again.
What about individuals who are having trouble paying their rent, paying their bills? You might have saw that last week. The CDC is getting involved in that and uh, preventing evictions. With that said, you know, people still have to pay that back rent.
Right.
So I know a lot of this is a federal level, but is there anything on the state level are you aware of that could be done to help these individuals? Because a lot of people in these situations have children. And as you know, if people lose their homes, the infection can also spread that way if they're homeless. So what can be done on a state level, if anything, to help these individuals?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rajette, and I think that it is perhaps one of the most important questions for the next 60 to 90 days. As you know, the governor's moratorium on evictions expired
Right.
at the end of August, and he did not extend that because he felt he didn't have the legislative authority to do that, the executive authority to do that, and has called upon the legislature, the General Assembly, repeatedly to take concrete, actionable steps to deal with this issue. Because if we don't, that expiration of that ban, along with the decreased income from the federal aid that was coming through, is going to hit people who are already behind on their bills because they've lost income from work. It's going to hit them in a way that it is going to be terrible. I think we potentially face a wave of evictions here in the next 60 to 90 days, which, as you pointed out, can actually lead to an increase in COVID-19. So I was happy to see the CDC step in and take the action that we did. But I do think at the state level we need to take some action as well. And I think the General Assembly has to step up and sit down with the stakeholders. First, sit down with folks that represent renters and make sure we understand what is the magnitude of the problem. Not everyone is behind on their rent, and some people were behind on their rent before the pandemic began. So we've got to look at the period from when the pandemic began until currently, determine what's the extent of the need. We also have to look at things like what is someone's income. If their income is still six figures or more, then perhaps they may not qualify for some type of assistance. I think we need to talk to organizations in Pennsylvania, like the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, and figure out if there's things that can be done through that mechanism, and work also with the private sector to see if there's some type of use of the CARES Act or other sources of aid that can be made to not only help the tenants but also help the landlords, because those landlords, many of them have mortgages that they have to pay. We can't put all of this on their back and expect them to carry it without any help either. But it's got to be an effort to be cooperative, to say that we have a common interest here, to not have people evicted, to not have landlords have to go bankrupt. None of those things are in the interest of our economy or the people of Pennsylvania.
In the past, the two sides usually did come together in a crisis.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not the case now. Now, I would argue, the tree starts dying from the top down. So to me, it's lack of leadership on the federal level that's unfortunately trickling down to the states. But as you know, we also have the issue of education of schools. And Pennsylvania schools, well, some are reopening, some are doing hybrid, some are doing virtual. We have the situation of schools that are doing virtual. If you're a single parent and have to work, what do you do with a grade school child? You can't leave them home by themselves. Do you think, or do you have a solution or an opinion on what the schools should do? Should they open, or should we leave that up to the school districts to decide what's best for their local communities?
I advocate for making available the guidelines, which have been made available both from the federal government as well as the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Pennsylvania Department of Education, general guidelines, but then leaving the decisions up to the individual school districts, because no school district is exactly the same. And most of the school districts have come up with a menu of options that parents can choose from, whether it's to go to completely online or to some type of hybrid or to go fully in person. Now, even some of the ones that have gone hybrid or in person have already stepped back from that. Others, like the Harrisburg School District, have chosen to go online 100%. I do advocate for leaving that in the hands of the school district. But as you pointed out, that puts a real burden on parents if we are in a hybrid or 100% online environment. And so there, I think what we have to do is ask communities at the local level to try and come together and create environments where their children can be in a safe learning environment and be supervised without being at risk. I know, for example, some churches and other institutions, nonprofit institutions, have come together to try and create some of those safe spaces. I know Representative Patty Kim has been putting a lot of time into creating those types of environments right here within the greater Harrisburg area. And I think that's what we want to look at, is encouraging that type of initiative. If there's a role for the state to play in assisting that, absolutely. But sometimes in such situations as this, it is oftentimes best done at the local level.
So what are you running for? What's your platform? What are the top 3 issues that you feel as though affects your district?
Yeah, we took a long, hard look at the very beginning as we went into this and said, again, it's a diverse district with everything from urban to suburban to small town to flat out rural. And I looked at this and said, what are the things that tie people together across this district, regardless of their zip code? One clearly is healthcare. And it's one of the top issues for people, no matter where they live, both in terms of access and in terms of affordability. And so access is an issue, for example, here in Harrisburg, even though you have a number of quality hospitals either in the city or immediately adjacent, sometimes people can't get access to them because they don't have the right insurance. And then in other places like northern Dauphin County and Perry County, access there is an issue because they may be more than 45 minutes away from the nearest urgent care center, much less a hospital. Again, that's a major issue, along with a shortage of primary care physicians. And then affordability is a big issue as well. Prescription medications, we all know, affects people everywhere, regardless of zip code. And affordability also continues to be an issue in terms of things like surprise medical billing, which is an issue that we as a state can take on. The Public Health Access Network has talked about this. There's been legislation that's been proposed that I think we can take steps on. So That's issue number one. And I think healthcare was an issue before the pandemic. It's even more important now. The second major plank of the platform is to focus on strengthening our educational system, and particularly our public education system. Um, we have got great teachers, we have got great administrators, and we've got great kids, and that's throughout our district, throughout the Commonwealth. But sometimes the recipe there is not one where it's setting them up for success. Sometimes it's a funding issue, where the funding requirements for a district are so heavy that they don't have the tax base to support those funding requirements. And a big part of the reason that's falling on local level is because the state has stepped back steadily over the years from its obligation to fund the states at the level they should be. So Pennsylvania should be funding the local school districts at about the 55% level, and it has not done that. And even though the new funding formula has helped, there's still a lot of room to go there. And then above and beyond that, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we see a number of challenges which have just grown. How do you deal with online learning? How do you deal with various types of standardized testing? So that's the second major issue that I want to see us make progress on, so that every kid, regardless of zip code, regardless of what they look like, what they believe, that they can all get a quality education. And then the third plank is reforming our state government. As I said earlier, we've got major problems with corruption. A lot of that stems from campaign finance reform, so we need to take that on. We also need to bring an end to the practice of gerrymandering. We need an independent redistricting commission to make sure that we have fair districts going forward. And that's critically important because, as you know, next year after the census, we're going to go through the redistricting process. We need to make sure that things like judicial gerrymandering, which my opponent introduced in a bill here just recently, which would divide our statewide judicial positions into districts, that kind of efforts to jury rig the courts don't go through. So those are the top three. There are certainly other issues that I care deeply about, and I know that voters care about, things like climate change, raising the minimum wage, investing in infrastructure, protecting women's rights. There's quite a few there, but those are the top three because they go across the district.
You have a very diverse district, as you mentioned. You also have diverse, not just urban, suburban, but racially, gender, age, everything else. As you know, there's a lot going on in the country right now with racial relations. Do you have a racial justice platform? If you so, would you stand? You brought up raising minimum wage, which is an issue, as you know, but depending on what race you are, it's a bigger issue. We also have disparities we saw with COVID-19 with healthcare. Black and brown individuals are catching it more and they're dying from it more than other races. Education disparities, school funding. You have different school districts in this district. So do you have a plan to address some of the racial inequities in your district?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's integrated through each of the items that I've talked about already. We have, whether folks want to admit it or not, we have a problem with systemic racism here in our society. And it's something that we have never dealt with adequately over the course of our 400 years of being around, and our 250 years plus of being a nation. So we've got to really take this on, and we can't continue to kick it down the road. And so the the efforts with Black Lives Matter have brought to the forefront the necessity for action now on issues such as reforming law enforcement. And while I don't support defunding the police, I do think there is plenty of space, not just for conversation, but for action about measures that will make sure that law enforcement really is serving and protecting all people in all communities, and that the citizens of the district and of our Commonwealth and our nation feel that way. That's number one.
Can you give an example of something you would support then? You said there are actions you would support. Can you give one example?
Sure. I think the series of measures proposed, the 8 can't wait measures, which are for reform of law enforcement, would be a great way to do it. So there's a number of those. One of them, for example, is banning the use of chokeholds.
Okay.
except under extreme duress, where an officer's life is literally being threatened. A second one would be to look at functions that police are performing now that could be better be performed by others. So, for example, responding to a mental health situation, um, may not law enforcement probably is not the best to go in first with that. Maybe they accompany the mental health responder, but we need to take some of the assets and the resources that are being used, have police carry out that function, and see if there's others that can better carry that out. We certainly want to promote de-escalation training and to make sure that the absolute minimum amount of force is used, and that well, before any force is used, there's adequate warning being given. Those are a few of the measures that I would be completely in favor of supporting, in addition to the legislation that's already been passed by Pennsylvania, such as the database for offenders and mental health counseling for people who have had some type of issues with PTSD or other things such as shooting incidents.
Okay. So you brought up redistricting in the past, and as you know, a lot of people feel as though the 15th district was gerrymandered to make it more difficult for a Democrat to win. You have part of Dauphin County, which is truly a battleground. It can go either way, and Perry County has always been very reliably Republican. How do you plan on reaching out to Republicans and independents so that they look at you as a person and what you want to do for them versus just party?
Right. It's a great question. It's an important part of the message. As I said at the very beginning, my goal is to bring people together. And so I want them to understand that once elected, that my responsibility will be to serve the entire district, not to serve only Democrats, but to serve everyone regardless of party affiliation. That doesn't mean you're going to make everybody happy because there's a lot of different views on issues, but it does mean number one, listening, and number two, going and seeing people where they're at and what they're dealing with. So part of my commitment that I tell them is I will always be accessible and you won't have to come find me. I will come find you. And I will hold in-person town halls at least once a quarter, with additional ones in using other forms of technology more frequently than that. So that's number one. Number two is I always encourage folks to vote for the person that they feel best aligns with their own values and with the things that they want to see in their leaders. And so the record that I have of serving in the military and of serving the community in ministry is one I think that appeals across party lines, and it allows me to go into places where maybe the room is filled with Republicans and say to them, I have value many of the same things that you do, and I understand the challenges that you're facing, and I'm not going to promise to fix all of them, but I will certainly listen to them and try and take action where I can.
If elected, what committees would you like to serve on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, because of the issues that I've raised, committees relating to education and healthcare would be at the top of the list of committees. I think also committees dealing with veterans affairs. As a veteran, I'm deeply aware of the fact that Pennsylvania has the fourth highest population of veterans in the nation, and that we have a high concentration of those veterans right here in South Central Pennsylvania. I want to make sure that they're well cared for, that their service to the nation is responded to with a commitment to not forget them after they're out of uniform.
As a veteran yourself, a lot of veterans, for some reason, aren't able to access their benefits. Why do you think that is?
That's a great question. It's I spent so one of the folks on my team is a veteran service officer for the county, and I've also met with and talked to officials from the VFW and the American Legion and other organizations that deal with veterans, and those organizations have their own veteran service officers. And what you learn is it's a combination of number one, education. Many veterans are not aware of the benefits that are available to them, so that's number one. And number two, then, is getting them beyond this mindset of, well, I don't really need it. There's other people that need it more than me. And this is really, I mean, it's an admirable mindset amongst our veterans, but but we want to get them to understand that they've earned the right to these benefits. And these benefits are already budgeted for, in many cases, by our federal government. So for them to take advantage of these benefits not only helps them, but helps our communities. It makes them healthier, makes them more economically self-sufficient. So I think it's really that combination of education and then of getting veterans to the point where they feel it's okay for them to accept the help that's being offered.
I'm going to put a question up for you if you can see that from Nadine. She would
Yeah.
like to know your thoughts about gun violence.
Yeah. So thank you, Nadine, for the question, and thank you for phrasing it that way. We do have an issue with gun violence, and I believe that we have to have a conversation about how to reduce gun violence, because we see it not only in the mass shootings, which occur in our schools and in our places of worship and in other places where innocents are gathered, but we also see gun violence occurring in homes, in residences, and the majority of gun deaths are self-inflicted, death by gun, and it's one of the leading causes of death amongst men in a certain age category. And so we need to have a dialogue about how we're going to take this on and how we're going to take common sense measures. And I think some of those common sense measures are things like universal background checks, and making sure that we have what are sometimes referred to as red flag laws, extreme risk protective orders, where if someone is judged to be a danger to themselves or to others around them, that temporarily they're going to be asked to surrender their weapon, and then they will be able to get it back. The intent is not to take away anyone's Second Amendment rights, but rather, as you pointed out, to reduce gun violence. And here's the analogy that I think is really helpful, particularly when you're dealing with people who are dead set opposed to any type of measures. The story I always use with them is the story of traffic accidents and traffic deaths. Back in the 1960s, Americans were starting to drive cars more and more and more, and the number of accidents, serious injuries, and deaths was steadily rising. And so what happened was a dialogue began, largely because of Ralph Nader, about steps we could do to reduce that trend. And so over the course of decades, we instituted mandatory seatbelts, airbags, crash tests, better driver's training, better road lighting. The list goes on and on and on. And the intent never was to remove cars from the road, but simply to make driving a much safer experience. We need the same conversation now when it comes to guns.
As you know, there's a lot of controversy right now about vote by mail. Um, the other side is claiming that there's a lot of fraud with it. Do you feel comfortable voting by mail? Are you encouraging voters to vote by mail because of the coronavirus so that they can still vote but safely?
I do feel very confident in vote by mail. I think it's an excellent opportunity for people to have this and to protect themselves, especially now during the pandemic. We're fortunate that legislation was passed last year. It's a bit tough to implement it in a presidential year, but I'm glad we have it as opposed to not having it. I have no concerns about fraud in the way that is being described by folks, particularly coming out of the White House and a few others. And I think what we see is that even here in the state of Pennsylvania, there was a piece recently by the former chair of the Republican Party, as well as a former Democratic Congressman, Patrick Murphy, saying that they both had the utmost confidence in voting by mail. And so we need to tell people that it is safe to vote by mail. The only piece that I'm concerned about is the primary showed that there are some issues, mainly logistically and administratively, at the county level, and we have to help resource the counties so that they are set up for success. Because this is a major task we're putting on their plate. You know better than I do. Over 50% of the votes during the primary in the state of Pennsylvania were by mail, and it's probably going to be that percentage again. So we're talking millions upon millions of ballots. We want to make sure that the counties are well set up to have ideally pre-canvassing, where they can take everything that's administrative and get the ballots ready for counting ahead of time, and then also make sure that they have the equipment and the manning for polling stations, as well as drop boxes and other things that make it easy for voters to safely deliver their ballots in case they're worried about delivery through the mail.
Right, because here in Dauphin County, there are no drop boxes at all. During the primary, there was one, and they even took that away.
Yeah,
So this is definitely a potential voter suppression issue, in my opinion.
I
Uh,
agree.
so I am happy to see the legislature has bills to take up. Let's just hope they work together
Hope so.
and
Hope so.
pass it.
And here's the thing, Rajette, that I don't get. I mean, a Dropbox helps everyone.
Yes.
Dropboxes help everyone, regardless of party. I don't get why that is suddenly a partisan issue. So
And so many states have used them for decades, and they're secure. So that
right,
argument to me doesn't work.
I
So
agree.
we only have a few minutes left, but what separates you from your opponent? Why are you different?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things immediately stand out. Number one is I've spent my life in service to others, whether that's to our nation or to the community or to my family. And I think my opponent, really, what you see is he has spent his life um, pursuing his own self-interest, and I'm sure he would argue with that. But really, when you become a multimillionaire owning literally thousands of properties in some cases, and spend a lot of time evicting tenants even before COVID-19, what you see is that that's the actions of self-interest, not of interest of others. And then I think you see um, an effort to by my opponent to paint himself as bipartisan, which I truly believe that I am and will be. But what you see is when you come to the actual voting record, you don't see that. 99% of the time, for example, in the most recent legislative session, my opponent voted with his party. And and when you look at the ratings by outside organizations, the American Conservative Union and Americans for Prosperity give him the highest scores for being the most conservative sitting senator in Pennsylvania State Senate. I don't want to be the party of the far right or the far left. I want to be the party that serves all, be the person that serves all the people here in 15th district. And people feel like they can, when they go into a room and meet me or pick up the phone and call me, then I'm going to listen to what they have to say, and that I will do the best I can to help them, and but to do it in a way that is transparent and accountable to voters.
I have two more questions. This one is from Amy. She has a questions about people with disabilities. It's a group that's often left out in a lot of ways. What are some ways as a state senator you can make things more accessible for people with disabilities?
Right. So I think we have to enter into dialogue with the stakeholders that are involved, people that are disabled, and make sure we understand firsthand what the disabilities are that they're dealing with. I think oftentimes when people think about disability, they think strictly of things like accessibility ramps, which are vitally important. Don't get me wrong, but there are many people that have other types of disabilities. They might be intellectual disabilities or an emotional disability, and so we need to have a forum and a way that we can look at the full range of disabilities to make sure that people have access to equal access to education and to housing and to employment. And one way would be to make sure to follow and to support a number of the initiatives that have been done by Governor Wolf. He has really taken a lot of forward-thinking steps to make sure that the disabilities are being examined. He set up, I forget if it's a board or a commission that is specifically dedicated to looking at that. So I think it's a process of working hand in hand with the executive branch, working hand in hand with the stakeholders, the people that are directly affected and their families, and then creating the appropriate legislation to improve the situation.
And if people want to learn more about you and are donate to your campaign, how can they do that?
Sure. Thank you for asking. It's you can go to my website. It's George Scott, um, George Scott at pa15.com, and I'm sorry, George Scott pa15.com, and there you can find a bit about my bio. You can find where I stand on issues. There's also a Get Involved link that will show you both how you can donate as well as how you can get a sign, how you can volunteer. There's all kinds of things. Yeah, so just go to our website and I'll see if I can get somebody to send that out through you to folks afterwards.
Great. So I'll let you do the closing, give your closing remarks. And in your closing remarks, please tell people why they should vote for you on November 3rd.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you again, Chairwoman Harris, for hosting this and allowing me to be here. And thanks to all the folks who tuned in tonight and the questions. They're great questions. And the reason you should vote for me on November 3rd and actually in 2 weeks as the vote by mail process begins is because in electing me, you elect someone, and I'm sorry again, I'm going to try and put that on mute right now. It's actually, yeah, I won't say whose name it is. But if
Well,
somebody
everyone knows this is
recognized right away,
live.
um, but what you'll have with somebody when you elect me is number one, a servant leader. I believe that once elected, that my job is to serve the people of the 15th district and not to serve my self-interest or serve corporate self-interest. Corporate self-interest, corporations have got a lot of lobbyists already in Harrisburg who are doing their bidding and getting legislators to do their bidding. That's not who I am. Number two, the reason you should vote for me is you can always count that I'll tell you the truth. Okay, and sometimes the truth will not be what you want to hear. I oftentimes tell people who disagree with me on an issue, and I'll say, look, I can tell you what you want to hear, or I can tell you where I stand. And you're not going to find any legislator that you're going to agree with 100% on issues. What I will always promise to do is listen to you, listen to why you believe what you believe, and then take that into consideration when I make the decision. And then I think the third reason is because we need leaders who are going to bring people together. The divisiveness that we've got in our entire nation is just simply spiraling out of control. We have got to bring that to an end. As you said, in this pandemic, we've seen the legislature fail to come and work on a regular basis with the governor. And there's no excuse for that. Even with party differences, there is no excuse for that in crisis. We need people that are committed to working for the best interests, especially during crisis situations, and who understand that there's something more at stake than their self-interest or the interests of the party. We've got to put the people of this district first, and that's why you should vote for me.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank everyone for tuning in. This video will be available afterwards on our website, dolphindems.com, our YouTube channel, and then, of course, on Facebook. Our next town hall will be next week, so tune in again, and thank you for joining us, George.
Thank you very much.